Hello and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our live talk, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Casting, but Never Dared to Ask. My name is Sonja Heinen. I'm from European Film Promotion. That is the international network organization of the National Film Promotion Institutes in Europe. To everyone, welcome. Can somebody switch his YouTube off? Everything you always wanted to know about casting, but never dared to ask. My name is Sonja Heinen. I'm from European Film Promotion. That is the international network organization of the National Film Promotion Institute. So, okay, now somebody switched it off. Okay, so, I start again. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Everything You Always Wanted to Ask About Casting, but Never Dared to Ask. I'm Sonja Heinen from European Film Promotion. We are the international network organization of all the national film promotion institutes from 37 countries in Europe. And we have one common goal, and that is to promote the best of European talent and the best of European films throughout the world. This talk is part of our European Shooting Stars program. You saw our great, outstanding 10 actors and actresses from throughout Europe in the little intro in the beginning. And I'm more than delighted that we can collaborate again with the Berlinale Coproduction Market to bring casting directors and producers a little bit closer together. And with us is Martina Bleis. Martina, thank you for giving us the opportunity again.
Thank you, Sonja, and thank you for giving us the opportunity, because you've really prepared this and put this together, this really interesting panel that we're all going to follow. We love to cooperate with you because both of us work a lot with producers. We at the Co-Production Market, we aim to promote, of course, the best international projects to potential partners. But we also, of course, want to give some insights for producers and share some know-how where possible from experts. And this is a great opportunity to work together with you, because you also deal so much with the shooting stars and with casting directors and with the casting topics. And I think many of our producers who are hopefully here as well today can benefit from answering getting those questions answered that they didn't dare to ask themselves, or can ask themselves as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Martina. And yes, please, I would like to strongly encourage all the producers listening to write your questions in the chat. It is totally anonymous. You can really dare to ask questions, okay? And now over to my colleague Karin Dix from the Shooting Stars team. She will introduce the panelists to you.
Yes, hello and welcome to this panel. It's a little bit new for us because we are public today. So normally we are part of the co-production market and address ourselves directly to the producers, but I could imagine that also quite a few actors are listening to the panel today and be interested to sneak in this situation, how it is when producers prepare the projects before they have been asked, to come on board. So of course, also the actors can ask questions, and I know for the producers, it's easier to ask their questions if you have a project in development or so in a closed room, but just feel like in a closed room and go ahead and all the casting directors here on the panel are very experienced and will answer your specific questions. And also a speciality which we have today is how we put the panel together is that we are spread all over Europe, So I would like to introduce the panelists to you, and I will start with Timka Green from Bosnia-Herzegovina. So Timka had an intense experience of working on more than 50 feature films and shorts, many of them awarded. Her most valuable lessons came through working with some great directors, just to mention a few: the brothers Dardenne, Jean-Luc Godard, Denis Stanovic, Jasmila Spanic, Marian Hensel, and many others. Timka is chair of the International Casting Directors Network and member of European Film Academy and Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Science. So please welcome Timka today.
Hello.
Hello, Timka. So from Spain, which is rather the opposite way of Europe. We welcome Lucy Lennox, who is originally from Ireland, but has been based in Spain for the last couple of decades. She has cast over 100 productions. She has always combined her career between working on international high-budget productions with independent film. Please welcome Lucy Lennox. So, Nikki, where are you? Okay. Nikki is a member of the CSA and is based in the UK and is in the UK's a leading casting director and has been a professional casting director for over 20 years, casting over 50 films and TV shows. Working across film, TV, and high-end commercials, she has worked with many leading directors and is chair of the CSA European Equity in Entertainment Committee and Festivals and Panels Committee. Please welcome Nikki.
Hi.
So we have a partner of shooting stars on this panel. We are very honored, to introduce to you. It's Spotlight, the home of casting. With studios in London's famous West End and a team of people across America and Europe, Spotlight knows the industry inside out and uses his knowledge to support its members. They truly believe in global casting and finding the right performer for the job. I would like to introduce the head of business development, Gary Broughton, who deals with casting directors, actors, and producers around the globe. Hello, Gary.
Hi, good to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us. So last but not least, I would like to introduce today's moderator to you, Imran Khan. Imran is responsible for the development of the production slate of Jörg Winger's new label at UFA Fiction here in Germany. Prior to his current role, he has worked in media for over 13 years at CBS Television, Warner Brothers, and Turner Broadcasting in various roles, including scripted series development and sponsorship marketing. He then launched his own media startup, the Snack Content Network. After successfully exiting his startup, Imran was then recruited by Google, where he spent the next 8 years working across 3 different continents as a marketing consultant. He has been recognized for his efforts with prestigious Cannes Lions Awards for his work on PG's anti-bullying and #LikeAGirl campaigns. Welcome, Imran Khan.
Hi, everyone.
So, my dear, I wish you a very successful and fruitful discussion today, and I will hand on the mic to Imran.
Great. I'm looking forward to having a really interesting conversation. I'm really excited, particularly because I'm a producer and I very, very rarely get to pick the brains of my casting director partners. And this is very exciting for me to really ask all those questions that I'm always wondering, okay, well, they must think I'm an idiot. Should I ask this? Should I not ask this? So I'm really excited to have all of you here today. And just to kick things right off, a lot of the folks in the audience are young producers. They're, starting out in their careers. And I think one of the things that I would be really keen to get a strong understanding on is what are some of the advantages and perhaps even some of the disadvantages of working with a casting director? And I would really be, full honesty. I want full transparency from you guys as to what you think some of those costs and benefits might be. So if it's possible, could we start with you, Nikki?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, as a casting director, we've got years of experience, something which counts. We know what actors are around, which ones are up and coming. For example, I remember casting Daisy Ridley for a Wiley music promo, and she was somebody that had potential, and we're just, it's our job to find out who's there, going to the theatre, through commercials. So, we've got a knowledge of who's around. And also, aside from that, we have, great relationships with agents. So for somebody who's an up-and-coming producer, they probably won't have those relationships. So we can kind of deal with them, and we work and speak to them on a daily basis. So I would definitely say that. And I don't think that there are any really disadvantages, apart from if a producer hasn't got a budget for a casting director. That is a disadvantage. But I would say those are kind of the key points, for me, really, from me.
Yeah, Lucy, would you want to add anything to that, particularly given some of your experience in the Spanish market?
I totally agree with everything that Nikki said, of course. I suppose the disadvantage would be that we're dream breakers, because everybody thinks that, in the Spanish market, I work mainly in international projects being shot in Spain, and they always say, oh, I've had a really good idea. I've been thinking for the lead female, Penelope Cruz. And then I say, oh, how did you think of her? I don't think she's available for your independent project, but we have other things. So I think the disadvantage sometimes is that we are honest, that we tell the truth. And a lot of people come to me and they say, but you never know, ask her anyway. So then I ring up her wonderful manager, or I don't ring her up. And we have the same conversation, like, no, they don't have a budget. No, it's not a project that I believe they're interested sometimes. So I think the advantages are exactly what Nikki said, and the disadvantages are that we do know. And I'm constantly surprised by how little which is why I love panels like this. The different sections of the industry don't talk to each other. I have friends in distribution, and they pull their hair out with the films that are getting, publicly funded, because they're not then ready for distribution. And I think the more that we talk, and the more we listen to people who know. I mean, I learn it every day, like everybody in the film industry. But I really think that young producers need to do their research, talk, and be realistic. It's the exception that proves the rule rather than being the rule. Although we're an industry full of mavericks, and there are, lots of awards for people who've broken the rules. But we're a little bit like the holders of the truth, the guardians of the truth in terms of casting.
Yeah, that's really helpful insight. I mean, definitely what Nikki said, I think, is really important in terms of exactly articulating the needs of producers, right? And the things that you guys really bring to the table. Timka, I'd be very, very curious to get some of your perspective, particularly because you've worked on such a vast array of movies.
Thank you. Well, I definitely agree with Nikki and Lucy on the points that they made. I would just like to add one. And this is one of advantages. I'm not sure about disadvantages. I like what Lucy said. Yes, that is very true. I wouldn't even think of it, but it's true. Another advantage is this is in our work what we learn, what we also we have a talent for reading scripts and the way of understanding the scripts. And this is also one of the advantages that the way we are understanding the scripts. Of course, this is the first thing that is established between director and the casting director, and producer and the casting director, that we are on the same page. When it comes to that, we are one of the first people reading the scripts and giving valuable notes to the scripts too. And this so. Well, yes, one of the earliest persons in the team when it comes to making movie, and I think this is great because, like every other head of department is filling the frame of the film together with director and producer, of course, with objects, colors, music, makeup. We are filling it with people, and this is so basically same principle. A bit more complicated, and I think that our insight is really important in that way, and this is definitely an advantage.
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? This idea that any film or TV show, you're like layering in the different aspects, right, to bring everything together. And casting is such an important piece of that. I have to agree. The folks that I've worked with, getting insight into the characters that have been written and developed, but now like have been brought to life, right, through the eyes of a casting director. Sometimes you're like, oh, I didn't even know that about my character. I guess I didn't realize that. That's, I think, a really, really great insight. Gary, I'd actually really love your perspective here, given the work that Spotlight does. Maybe you can even just take a second for the audience, for those people who don't know Spotlight or aren't familiar with Spotlight, exactly what you do, and then specifically how that plays into the role of casting today.
Yeah, of course. But put briefly, we're a casting service that facilitates connection between those that are involved in the casting process. So our members are professional trained actors and performers. We have some 65,000 of them spread throughout the world. And also our users are casting professionals, production professionals, agents. And as I say, our platform, our digital tools, and much of our service is all about connecting those people together to make sure that our members, our actors, have the best possible tools and expertise at their disposal to promote themselves, to explain their skills and their backgrounds through their profile on Spotlight. And for our casting professionals and production professionals, giving those guys the tools that they need and all of those tools they need to make their process as seamless as possible, to collaborate with each other and to do the research that they need to do, to send out casting briefs and receive submissions from agents and performers. We have some services that enable our users to manage media, whether that's self-tape auditions or casting footage from the audition room, or whether it's performers with their show reels and their voice reels. And we hope to make that process of finding performers and refining the lists of performers as easy and as easy and efficient as possible throughout the process. So, many production professionals and producers will be introduced to Spotlight via their casting director. Their casting director may be sharing a list that they've made or some research that they've done on the Spotlight platform and send that on to their producer. Or it may be that in some cases, producers directly use Spotlight as a research tool or as a collaboration tool to work alongside a casting professional. There's many different ways that it's used, but really we're kind of in the background of the process, and we're there to make it easy for all of the professionals around us and the community of performers to get their job done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Nikki's point, right? This industry is about connection, and casting directors are full of connective, tissue in some ways between agents and so many folks that are players in the industry, and Spotlight's helping enable that to some extent.
I mean, aside from the digital tools that we publish and on our website and our research tools, we put a great deal of emphasis on the relationships and the connection. I mean, in normal times, we have many events for our members and our casting directors where we bring people together. And I think somebody earlier on made a really good point about how people working in different corners of our industry rarely have the opportunity to come together and explain face to face how things are done and how they see it from their perspective. And so we see it as an important part of our mission, because we do serve all of those different groups. We like to bring them together, and we like to sort of bring them together and then step back and let those guys kind of be introduced to each other and get the most from knowing each other. Of course, at the moment, things are a little bit more difficult, and we're doing a lot more of that via Zoom and many events which enable us to reach a lot of our members. But yeah, you're right. Connection is so important in the industry.
That's great. So for the audience out there, I'm going to ask a couple more questions that we had previously spoken about, but please do add questions to the chat function on YouTube, and we'll make sure to surface some of those questions as we go through today's conversation. So, one of the things as a producer that I often am really curious to get a perspective on, but I never ask, and I guess I should, is at what point in the process should a producer be reaching out to a casting director? So for me personally, I always reach out. I always want to reach out right away. Sometimes even in the development phase where I'm like, okay, we've got this really great idea. We know that we're going to go out and sell it relatively soon. I already want to reach out to my casting partners to get a sense of, who's right for these types of roles, and get a sense of, what this could look like if I have certain actors' minds, actors' images in mind as we develop. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. So I would love to just get some perspective from the casting directors in the room. Timka, could I ask you to kick it off?
Yes. behind the sun, I will try to. You can hear me at least. If you cannot see me, that's okay. What is? I think I would say it depends on the difficulty of the task. Generally speaking, like if you, again, I always comparing other departments to casting, because casting is also a department in the filmmaking, and the casting director is the head of department, which is something easily forgotten. Like in other departments, if, for example, for a film, a city has to be built, it will probably start very early on because it's already, the idea is there. So also it depends, like casting some, also depending on that casting group. But this is one of the, it is one of the earliest phases. But what I'm experiencing more and more in the last several years, is that the casting process is pretty much influencing the script writing process, and it's done parallelly. And as soon as there's a story, I'm speaking about directors who write the script and will direct the film, which I'm mostly working with. I generally always did like that. So yes, there is a story, and several times I did casting when I only heard the story on phone, like this is what it's about. So let's think about casting, and then the script is written depending on that. Also created together with actors sometimes, and more and more it's becoming then a process that is somehow interlaced, and which is, I think, that's how early. So the earliest would be when the script is there, and then as I said earlier, the casting director is one of the first person who reads it, and then the process starts a very early phase. But more and more, it's been even done now parallelly, writing scripts and doing casting. I don't know if my colleagues have the same experience, but this is really happening mostly lately, actually.
Yeah, Nikki, I would be curious to hear what's going on in the UK in terms of exactly this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been many times, going back to Timka, where I've been sent a script and it's just not being developed properly. And I think that needs to be paid so much attention. It should have gone through the right rigorous development process, you know, with a script editor on board, a development producer on board as well. So I think that's really important. That's one of the things. And also development finance in place as well, because, you know, as every other department, casting directors also need to be paid. So do line producers. You know, we all have to be paid. So I think those for me would be two key pointers, you know, that would be required for when a producer approaches me. Yeah. You
know, and actually I would have a follow-on question just to that point specifically. You know, so I'm developing TV, and in the development process, I think, you know, before we even get to a script, sometimes we create like a series concept or a pitch paper type thing. I've had the experience where sometimes I've gone to my casting directors, depending on how big the project is, and said, you know, look, we have this really ambitious project that we want to put together. I want to work with you guys, but, you know, before we kick things off officially, here's this thing. What do you think? You know, what's top of mind? Do you often find that that's something that happens, that producers that you have good relationships with reach out? How much of that is like a no-no? How much of that is okay? I'm curious to get your honest opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're working with a producer that you're familiar with and that you've worked with before, yeah, absolutely. You know, the concept could be sent over, and just a little bit of information about the type of actors that, you know, that they're looking for. So yeah, absolutely. In that sort of scenario, you know, we'd look at that and we'd offer up some options maybe just to help in sort of the pitching process. Yeah,
that's great. That's really helpful. And Lucy, over to you. Like, I'm really fascinated to understand how the Spanish market deals with this, and at what point you get involved with some of the projects you're working on.
I guess, and also, I mean, because I work kind of across the world, so it really, my answer to this would be, it would depend on the project. You know, it's always good to have a conversation with a casting director in the same way as it's good to have conversations. But when you want the work to be done, then it depends on the project. So it's exactly like what Nikki said, you know, sometimes I have meetings all the time about projects that may or may never be made, but I like being involved. I like knowing, and somebody will brainstorm with me, but they're not asking me to come up with names or things. They're just saying, oh, what do you think? Is it something you like? And I'll say, oh yeah, but there's another project that's similar, or, you know, don't base your entire project for the funding on having names when you're going to be working on a small budget. So it really depends on the project. But I would say to everybody, don't be scared of making a phone call and say to the casting director, when you have a question like today, ask me. I read scripts. Sometimes I'm very busy and I don't read the script, but I might read the synopsis. And then I'll say, oh, that's a great idea. It's really original. Or, ooh, maybe you should look at the 3 other films that have just been funded by the film board because they're all about the same thing. And it's always, for me, about communicating. But then what I don't like, or what I suggest not to do, is want to cast before you have a green light or before you have names, because you can waste a lot of time and a lot of money doing that. So there's no point. And if you want a name being a star attached to your project, you need to be financed first.
Yeah.
Generally. I mean, there are many exceptions to the rule, but there's no point calling me and saying, okay, I've got an idea. I mean, I get phone calls sometimes, you know, I've got an idea. I've kind of got a first draft of a script, but we need to, and we don't have a producer. You know, I'm a producer, you know, I'm an independent producer, but I don't have a production company. But can you do the casting and attach, you know, well-known names? And I'm like, no, because the first question an agent will ask me is, what state is your funding in? And I'll be like, oh, their, you know, grandmother has left them, you know, €1,000 and they're putting that in. And also the other thing, like, you know, like all professionals, I do like to be paid for my time. Although I like sharing information and I like to support particularly young Spanish filmmakers at the beginning of the process, because I very much believe in supporting people at the beginning of their careers. But it's just being realistic about what state the project is, what the lifetime, you know, your timeline is. And then you can call and say, I mean, there's projects that I've talked about, you know, 2 years ago that I've helped them in the development stage, and now they've got funding, but they won't be shot until 2021. So then we'll readdress them at that stage. You know, some of the projects I've been involved in, I've worked on for 7 years. Between first meeting and the wrap party or the premiere, which is, you know, that moment of, you know, great, we did it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, that's super, super helpful. I really like that perspective. It definitely allows, I think, for myself as a producer, to have a better sense of how not to waste time, right? How to be very discerning with when I'm really reaching out to the people that can help me make the best possible products, right? At the end of the day, the best possible piece of art or film. You know, Gary, I want to turn it over to you because I'm really curious in terms of the spotlight. I know that you've already mentioned that there's actors on the platform, there's casting directors on the platform. As a producer, and this might be, you know, those question that you don't dare to ask, but on the platform, can producers, you know, go in and like look for like early day suggestions, particularly when they're looking at thinking about developing a piece of content so that they're not necessarily bugging their casting director friends? What are some of the resources that Spotlight offers to a producer directly?
Yeah, I mean, I think we generally encourage producers and all of our users to sort of use the platform and the resources responsibly and professionally. And I think we've heard a few points in the last few minutes about the appropriate time in which to reach out to people, whether that's agents or performers in our case, or whether it's, you know, other casting professionals. I mean, there's a kind of time and a place, I think, within the process to do that. And the best advice to some producers might be to rely on a casting professional, employ a casting professional, engage with them and let them tell you the right time at which to start actually making lists of performers and kind of starting that reaching out to agents process. I mean, you know, that said, our platform is open for producers to use. Producers can have access to our platform. We do vet and qualify everyone who uses our platform. So if a producer approaches us or somebody with a project approaches us, one of our account management team will talk to that producer and, in many cases offer a little bit of advice and kind of learn a little bit more about the circumstances and the stage at which that project is, and then advise that producer or that filmmaker as to whether now is the best time to start using Spotlight, or whether it's maybe wait a little bit and wait for some funding or some more kind of knowns to be fixed around that project, or whether indeed to defer to a casting director's knowledge on that. I mean, we work quite closely with casting organizations around the world, whether that's CSA or ICDN or the CDG in the UK or wherever. And we like to make sure that the values that those organizations have are aligned with ours in terms of professional conduct and the best time and place to make those calls. But yeah, like I say, those tools are there and they're open to producers to use, but probably on good advice from a casting professional or one of our own accounts team.
Great. Yeah, that's actually very, very helpful. I think for me personally, like I was saying, as a producer, when I'm working with a writer or some talent to put together an idea, it's so helpful sometimes to get a sense of just like be able to quickly look through, let's say, a database and have an understanding of like who's out there. And I think sometimes what we end up doing is we work from our own memory of like the folks that we have seen in shows or, in theater. And I think, as Nikki was saying, this is what you do. This is your lifeblood, right? These are the things that you're paying attention to. So it's very useful to know that there's some resources we can use on our own, but then really reaching out to the right casting director when particularly like let's say when funding is in place. So to that point, money, let's talk money. So we have a project, it's funded. I'm really interested, Nikki, to understand in the British market and casting overall, but in the British market specifically, what happens next? Now, someone's reached out to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the casting process so producers can understand what your day-to-day is like, what you're going through, and perhaps as a part of that, maybe even talk to us a little bit about how cost is structured for producers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if a producer comes to me and they've been given that it's all greenlit, finance is all in place, obviously I would have read the script, and after responding to the script, have the usual discussions about cast, and also go through the characters, go through our leads. I would then come up with a list of ideas and present those to the director and the producer. And we just sort of work our way through that. And if they like them, great. If they want more, I will add more. So I will just ultimately come up with a list of cast options. But I'll also really pay attention to the overall budget of the film, because if it's a really low budget project, then that will reflect the type of talent we can get in terms of leads, if they want somebody who's got some profile. So that does determine quite a lot. If they're quite open to seeing up and coming new talent, there's a couple of films that I can just remember that I can recall, which was Bend It Like Beckham, which was I believe Keira Knightley's first project, or one of her first projects. Now she's an ultimate star, and that was a low budget project, but there were quite a few, not just Keira, that were in that film that their careers launched from from that. And also Lock, Stock, I think is probably another film where that launched quite a lot of actors their careers, and the budgets for both of those were quite small. So it would just depend on that really, and we can't kind of sort of give you a set fee on what talent would get. That's a conversation that we would have with with agents. And again, it's all those things, those questions that will be asked from agents, and then that will reflect what they get in terms of the fee structure.
Great. So just so I understand that correctly, you're saying that whatever the fee structure or compensation that's going to the actors, there's a portion of that that you take as the casting director, or is there just no, that's what I was trying to say, is what's the cost for the producer from the casting director, and then of course the fees for the actors are their own kind of thing?
Oh, so we would get our like set fee, again that would reflect on what the overall budget is of the project, and we normally would get an upfront fee to begin when, you know, starting on the project, and then we would get the remaining fee, which is usually on the first day of principal photography. Yeah, so our fees are separate to what talent would get.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And so Timka, I think what would be really interesting for you know, for the audience to know is, how does that work in markets like, you know, Bosnia or in the Balkans? Like, it seems like the processes would be very similar. Is there anything that you'd add to what Nikki just took us through?
Yes, it's very different, actually. I mean, the process of casting, our work, I think, basically is the same. It's there is no the only what the difference is, for example, casting director in Balkans do not negotiate fees with actors or agents, but this is done by the producer, which is really a big difference. And so everything else is the same, reading scripts, having the first polarization, and giving list of options, auditioning, and search for the right actor for the right part. And then at some point, and then availability, of course, and all the preparation, everything is there. But then at some point, actors do get negotiate, or it's the producers who negotiate a fee with actors, or with agents, and not the casting director. And casting director is paid per project. Sometimes it's per project. If you do all the project, if it's a question of searching for several parts in the TV show, or for example, so in some other international project, if I don't do the whole casting, then it's a time-wise contract. Otherwise, it's like per project, and it's also paid in several rates.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that's actually really interesting, because I think working in the German market, and I actually also work internationally, we do start to see these differences, right, with our different projects, as to what, you know, who's negotiating which fee, and how we work specifically with our casting directing partners. I mean, we definitely see this particularly with working with casting for children. It's like, you know, very, very regulated in different countries. And I think that's always been really interesting for me. So we'll get to that in just a second. Lucy, I know you do a lot of commercial casting, and I'm really curious in the world of commercials, if, you know, this process kind of sits similarly. What's different? Like what would be noteworthy for the producers who are going to be working on commercials?
I mean, they're two totally different industries.
Right.
In my office, we work a lot in television, which is very different to film as well. So in television, we get paid a weekly rate. In film, I get paid like Timka per project, but we structure the payment to casting directors depending on when production has money, because sometimes they have development money, and then they have the green light money, and it depends on the national financing. And in commercials, it's a very different world. Like in my office, I have assistants that only work in fiction and assistants that only work on commercials. And it's a very, very different language, you know. And commercials, I've worked with some of the top filmmakers in the world who are doing commercials. There's no pretense in commercials that we're doing it for art. We're doing it to get paid. And that's how we run it as a business. And they have a budget which is closed. They're not pretending that they're going to make the money after it's made. So it's extremely different, the type of actors. There's a crossover, of course, but, you know, commercials, I get paid a daily rate. The more days I get paid, the more days I do, the more days I get paid. Actors get paid, and it's all, we tell actors in commercials what they're going to get paid in advance. In fiction, there's a lot more room, because they have to want to do the project. They have to want it to be on their CV. They want to have their name attached to it. In the same way as for me, when I'm doing fiction, I have to really believe truly in the project, in fiction, in television and film. And I will say no. Whereas in commercials, my name is not really attached to it.
Great.
And the actor's name is not usually, unless they're a celebrity, and then we're talking about an extremely different world where they're getting paid, you know, much more than they would get paid to do a film, to do it. So I see them as totally different side industries. For me, I like both of them, but I don't treat them the same way. And in fact, I don't really treat film and television in the same way either. They're slightly different as well. The budgets are different, the timing is different, the way that I approach the casting is different. And in film, I'm usually working with auteur filmmakers and I'm going into their universe. I have to do a lot more working. And then in television, although there are auteur projects, but in television, you're entering also into the universe of whichever the network is. So I have to adapt if I'm working for Netflix or Stars or Amazon, and we kind of know what their vibe is. So we have to make sure that we're approaching the project with the realization of what the project is. You know, casting directors, we're very chameleonic. We adapt to the director, we adapt to the producer, we adapt to the budget. So we're always working. I'm always trying to understand what somebody wants. I'm always trying to listen and then give them the options for what they want. I mean, I think that's basically how I would describe it.
Yeah, I mean, this is great insight, right? Particularly thinking about the worlds of commercials is very independent from film, is very independent from television. You brought up a juicy topic in your answer, so I'm going to put it back to you. So you said budgets, right? The budgets in television and film are vastly different. Can you want to talk a little bit more about that, just to help the folks who are listening understand what, you know, what's the different scale, how that impacts the way you think about the project?
Okay, the difference. So I'm just going to go back. I'm not going to talk about commercials now because that's different, right? So in independent film, producers are sometimes mortgaging their house. You know, and they're very, very, you know, I'm talking about European independent film. People are putting their every penny into making it, and they're hoping to recoup the money on sales. There's a slight, you know, I don't know if other casting directors agree with me, but my nemesis in the industry, although I have many friends who do this job, is the sales agent, because they're trying to sell the project and they want cast to sell the project. I'm like, you know, let me cast the right people, not just somebody who's going to get you a sale in Japan or India. Let me cast you somebody, because the films that I have been allowed to cast freely have been, or my colleagues have been allowed to cast freely, are the ones like Bend It Like Beckham that Nikki mentioned, or films like Victoria that I've cast, or those films are the ones that make careers for the filmmakers, they make careers for the actors, and they're perfect because they've been cast with no pressure for sales. But then we have these mid-range budgets where between 5 and 10 million, where it's not enough money to have a big name, but they need a name because they need the pre-sales to get the project. And this is a world of pain that we get in. And we have to fight to get the people. You know, I'm very aware that the film has to get made, so I will fight for these projects to get the people that will help them. But I'm silently at night, you know, having pictures, you know, dealing with sales agents who say this name isn't enough. And I'm talking about, when I write my book, which is when I retire, I have put forward some of the leading actors in the world for these independent projects 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I have producers' notes saying, I'm not even going to say the names. Oh, we need somebody with a bigger profile. We need somebody with a bigger profile. And I keep this because the other thing that people should remember about casting directors or casting professionals is that we have really good memories. And I will be naming and shaming the people who said no to Oscar winners who wanted somebody else, but not for another 30, 40 years. And with the coronavirus, my retirement is a long way off. So it's really important to, in that sense, it's like trying to get the very, very best cast, but on the budget. So for me, it's very complicated on the mid-range budget, which is what I work on a lot, 5 to 10 million. On an independent budget, it's just working out what you have. And what I really suggest to young and producers or not so experienced producers is look at your budget, you know, think about how it is, and then you divide it into the different sections. And then you say, I have 250,000 euros to spend on cast, but I've got 40-day players who need to be paid. So maybe I will rewrite it and we won't have so many people just saying, here's your coffee, Mr.
Yeah.
So make your money work. Casting directors, we get paid a percentage of the budget, but it's not always, it's like what Timpka said, maybe we're working with other casting directors. And then the difference that you asked about with television has a closed budget because the network has approved the budget, and you don't often have overages. You sometimes can go back to the network and say, they say they want a name, and you'll go back, well, that's not in the budget because, you know, 1 million per episode, Netflix, you don't have the money. So we can go back, and sometimes I'll accept it, but generally in television, I know what the budget is. I get paid per week. I know what I have to get, and I don't have to play the financing game in the same way. And they also have dates. They know who they're going to shoot with. They know when they're going to shoot. So if who they want is not available, they will accept somebody obviously good. Whereas in film, they might push the dates if they don't get the person that they want. Or they might be more flexible to wait for somebody to have a gap in their schedule. So they're very different. Does that answer the question? I got a bit carried away there.
Yeah. No worries. I think this was super helpful. And I think just so the audience knows, this actually already jumps into some of the questions that are coming in, particularly around, the way that the financing is structured and, how casting directors are compensated differently for film and television. So that was some of the questions that were already coming in from the producers. I want to jump to a question that I think was also really relevant to Gary. So one of the questions here from the audience is, how visible are trans and or non-binary actors right now? Are they challenging to find? And, Gary, I wanted to particularly shoot this over to you, given that Spotlight is such a great platform for connection. I wanted to know, what are some of the resources there, and how do you enable casting directors to, discover talent from these types of communities?
Yeah, it is a good question, and it's one that comes up a lot recently. We've made great efforts to give our performers the facility and the options to describe themselves in the way that they wish to be described and to be found by casting directors. So, performers and their agents are in control of their profile, and they can describe themselves as fully as they wish on their profile, which gives the casting directors, the ability to find them when they're looking for those performers. I mean, also when it comes to breakdowns, and that's the profile search part of things, breakdowns slightly differently. And my casting professional friends here might be able to elaborate on this for me. But casting directors generally, when they're putting a breakdown out, are looking for suggestions and are looking for input from agents and from the performers and the people who receive those breakdowns. And so we just try to encourage our users to be as inclusive as possible in the language that they use and in the assumptions that they make about a script or about a project. And throughout the process of putting a brief out on Spotlight, there are reminders to users about, like I say, the language, the terminology that they use, and the obligations that they have when they're looking to cast on a platform such as Spotlight. And there are resources that we provide and links that we provide to the organisations who can help producers to ensure that their brief is as inclusive as possible. Mm-hmm. Our professionals team is always available to talk to producers or casting directors who have any questions on that subject. So, I mean, from our perspective, it's about making sure that those briefs are as inclusive as possible and that they're not closed to any particular group of performers just by virtue of maybe an accidental sort of an accidental misstep in the terminology or the selection of a wrong kind of checkbox within describing a role. And we try all the time to improve our systems to make sure that they are as kind of inclusive as possible and serve the casting directors and our members as much as possible. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really great, because I think everything changes when there's a space for different types of communities to be represented and the language that's used to really create a space to have more inclusion. Nikki, I also want to toss this question over to you, and I would add, do you ever challenge, like when you read a script or when you read a breakdown, do you sometimes send against type recommendations back? And is this like an opportunity for you to really kind of delve into folks that might identify as trans or non-binary, or sometimes even in terms of race or gender? I'm curious.
Yeah, do you know what, Imran? That's something that I've always done throughout my casting life, I've got to be honest with you, and completely challenge that. When I'm running a session, somebody comes in completely off brief. And do 9 times out of 10 it works, completely works. So it's just opening the minds, I guess, of the directors a little bit more and producers, because they've got something set in stone in what they want. They might not think of a different type. So yeah, I always do that, always.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's really good to know that, once upon a time I worked as an actor as well, and it's always been really refreshing for me when I would go in for roles that weren't really written for me, and then sometimes I would get them. And I always found that to be very interesting to know that casting directors are, making those choices consciously.
Yeah.
I want to jump to another question in the queue here. And I think, Timka, this is something that would be very interesting to get your perspective on. So do you sometimes work in a way where a producer would give you the entire cast budget for you to allocate in the best possible way to get the best mix of names and no-name talent? Like, is that something, Timka, given the experience that you've had, that you've ever been tasked to do, or is it always work in a kind of more standard way?
No, when it comes to the budget, I have never been given the budget to, but everything else is just like you said, it's always like that. Even if so let's say we are talking, basically there are no surprises because the budgets are all very low where I work. So, and this gives a certain freedom. There is no pressure to find names or, there is on the whole Balkans, very rarely there is somebody called star, or there's somebody who's going to really sell the film, etc., etc. But this is a smaller market, and everybody's really, there are some actors, let's say, who work more than the others, which gives you fantastic freedom to constantly discover and push new people, because from the experience here, there's not a huge difference for them. So I don't think even many actors know what they're capable of, or what their impact in front of camera would be, because they don't have so much experience. And this is something that I really love about working where I live and work, because there is more. I don't know. There is more opportunity, and there is no pressure from that part. Like, so it's always like that. I'm always actually given the possibility to really bring talents or bring actors who really fit the part best, without. There are no complications when it comes to the sales agents or that I have requirements that, that there has to be a name or something. So this is my luck, actually, when I work.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great to hear. Nikki, I'm going to actually flip that question back to you in the UK. So the question again was, have you ever been just given a budget and said, hey, give us the best possible mix of actors, bankable or non-bankable? What do you think? Has that ever happened to you? And how does that work?
Yeah, sometimes we are given a cast budget, and our leads will be allocated this amount, and then all the supporting roles will be allocated this, and it's broken down really nicely. But other times we're just given a cast budget, and then it's kind of up to us to break that down a little bit in terms of leads. So yeah, that's how, swings and roundabouts, really, I would say.
Yeah, and then have you ever been in a situation where you need a bankable actor, right? So you've talked about this. All of you guys have talked a little bit about this, right? And you need a bankable actor, and that actor is going to take up most of your budget. Is that something that you run into, and what do you do in those situations? How do you partner with your producers to make it work?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when we're given a cast budget and, you know, the talent that we're kind of given that they want us to go out to as well, is just, it's just not doable. And well, in my projects that I work on, yeah, it's just not doable. And it's, you don't kind of want to give producers that false hope. So you've got to be upfront and just say, look, that's just not going to happen with this. They'll probably want the whole budget of the film. So yeah, that has happened before. Yeah.
I need to work with you guys. I like people just being really direct, really upfront, being like, sorry, I'm going to crush your dreams. No, that's not. Flipping to another question, Lucy, I think this could be a great question for you. So we had someone write in, so what's the difference between working with a casting director who has an agent versus one without, and the best ways to navigate the, the timeline / fee part of the process? Like, I figure that you might have some insight here, with working with and without an agent.
Well, I mean, I don't have an agent, so I don't really know what it would be like to have an agent. I know that some of the casting directors have agents in the UK. Here, and my relationships tend to be very personal with the producers. I've been working for 30 years, so people have my mobile, they pull me up, or they send an email, and I'm very active with young filmmakers as well. So I spend quite a lot of time with, people who do, at the very beginning of their careers. So it's a very long term. I suppose that the advantage of working with a casting director, with an agent, it's just a very much, are they available, and knowing about their fee. Whereas for me, it's a longer conversation. It involves lunch. So I suppose the advantage is that if you're dealing with a casting director with an agent, the casting director has more time for the project because they don't have to go to lunch with so many producers. Except for we don't do lunch anymore, so I do it all on Zoom. So that's fine. I eat my lunch while, on Zoom. But I think it doesn't matter whether a casting director has an agent or not. I think it doesn't make any difference to the production at the end of the day. I don't know, Nikki might have a different opinion.
I totally agree. I mean, I do have an agent, but like you, Lucy, I've got relationships with producers that I work with and I get repeat work. It's just nice to have somebody there to maybe bounce a few ideas off, but ultimately producers will just reach out to me still.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, that's super helpful to know that, these kind of personal relationships are super important. And then, of course, there's these like more professional, being able to check in with an agent around availability and a fee and kind of get some of that information up front as a producer, so you know what you're dealing with in terms of cost and so on and so forth. We have another question, and I think we just have I think it's probably about time for one last question here that I thought was really interesting. And I think, both Gary and Timka, you could just maybe add a couple of thoughts here. So someone asked, how do I know which casting director I should approach, particularly in an international co-production? And so, when you're dealing with that, so Timka, given that you work in this very specific market, I'm sure you've worked on co-productions. Yes. How do you answer that for a producer? Like, how do they know who they should reach out to?
Well, it's related to the, I often did local casting for films that can be, sometimes the story of the film is set in Balkans, for example, and then this is the opportunity for me to do local casting, even if film is done somewhere else. I did one big part of the casting for a film, a Spanish film that was shot in Spain actually, and the story took place in Bosnia. So, I did casting with Camila Isola together. Sometimes sometimes in the international co-production, there's a character that comes from these parts in a story set in the country where the original production is, and in that case. So basically, mostly how I approach as a casting director from a certain part of the Europe, for example, is in these cases. Also, the same goes the other way around. If I do casting for a film, and then in the film there is a character that comes from Colombia or Poland or any part of the world, and in that case, I'm looking for actors in this area. And if there are more actors, sometimes I would maybe approach a casting director working there. So how do I approach, which casting director to choose is, okay, depends on where, I mean, do your research and see who you like best, or is there an interest of a certain place where you need to look for actors, etc., etc. So this would be the way. But from my point of view, where I live, because it's specific, this is how it happens.
And Gary, and very quickly, if you want to just add a thought in terms of some of the tools that Spotlight might actually make available for that exact case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the subject of research, I would just add that on Spotlight, you're able to research casting directors. We have profiles of hundreds of casting directors, and you can see their profile. You can see what they've worked on. You can see their specialization, their geographical area of operation. I mean, that's all free to browse on Spotlight. If you go to Spotlight and look for our contacts listings, that's there. I mean, the other one I would just add to that is to maybe contact one of the professional guilds in the geography that you're working in, or if it's an international project, ICDN, the International Casting Directors Network, has a website where its members' profiles are listed, and there is some help there for producers who wish to engage with a casting director but not quite sure who that should be or where that casting professional should be. So certainly the ICDN website or Spotlight's own website would be a good starting place for that research.
Definitely, yes.
Great. So I know we're at time, and I know there's probably many, many more questions. So hopefully, there'll be an opportunity and a forum for you to ask those questions and perhaps have some of the casting directors respond back. But I just wanted to thank all of you for your time, your insights, sharing some of your personal experiences and thoughts in and around how producers can work better with casting directors and better understanding your world, so we know exactly when to bother you. So thank you so much for all of your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Imran.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.